Let's do this! Come on. Now we're getting somewhere.
Hey guys, welcome to Guess the Rank episode 2. Our last episode was Roadhog on Anubis. This time we have at first Farah on Watchpoint Gibraltar, but this player changes to Winston and on to Reinhardt in the second half. First things first, we've got the friendliest guy in the whole of Overwatch here. He's calling out what he can see through the glass, which can help prevent teammates from instantly being picked off if the enemy team are running Widowmaker, and allows people to counter-pick before the game actually begins. Good thinking. And when someone asks him if they can play his hero, would you look at that, he was willing to switch it up. Let's see how good his Farah is. You can see he goes straight out here with the intention of knocking someone off. This high ground area generally isn't effective at stopping the payload, but it allows the enemy team to gain ult charge early and it's good to shut that down. Now I want you to watch carefully, because I have no idea what went through the enemy Reinhardt's head here.
He's trying to aim me.
Jumping down from high ground with a failed charge is the weirdest decision at this point in time. There's no way they'll gain anything from trying to fight outside of the spawn, and Reinhardt's choice of target is even more questionable. Fortunately Farah can see the opportunity here and takes care of him. One thing I've noticed so far is that Farah isn't spending a lot of time in the air. This player really loves their concussive blasts, but at least it shows they know how to make use of Farah's mechanics. Again though, what I don't understand is the fact that the enemy team is still playing in this position, even though both of their tanks are no longer holding it. I'm not sure how smart it is to have Farah restricted to the payload here. I understand the need to move it, but Farah should be above trying to get some suppressive damage in to stop the enemy team from being able to hold the advanced position. It's also much more difficult to land hits on the enemy team on a horizontal plane, which obviously supports the idea that Farah should be in the air as much as possible. I just want to pause a second to elaborate on Farah a bit. There's a monumental difference between the effectiveness of a Farah that can aim well and a Farah that's pretty average. In a team comp with a Farah and a Genji, Farah needs to land as many shots as possible to make it possible for Genji to finish them off. This team comp doesn't really have a lot of sustainable damage, especially with the two projectile players. If you were running Soldier and Farah, the Farah could get away with being slightly less accurate, the Soldier's DPS is more consistent. This is just a bit of insight into how confident you need to be as Farah in order to pick with your team comp. Back to work. Not 100% sure on booping Reinhardt towards the team. It does help Zaya melt him, but he's not an issue for the team at the backline when he's not defending any key targets. This type of ult can happen quite often as Farah, however I definitely think it was unnecessary. When you have a Zaya on your team, you really want to synergise your ult timings, unless one of you builds it a lot faster than the other. It's a habit that can be difficult to break, but can waste significant time if you don't sort it out. I'm glad to see that Farah is coming back with the higher ground approach, catching the McCree off guard, fortunately one of the only heroes that's actually going to be able to deal with Farah. I have no clue what he was doing there though, and he allowed himself to be hit by so many rockets. Another ult without any combo, and Farah is the only person speaking in chat. This game is a bit uncoordinated so far, and there we have it. I wasted Zaya ult, because the two people who could have comboed had already used theirs. As tempted as it is to try and shut McCree down, Farah is every ult in McCree's dream. He struggles enough as it is, but Farah doesn't move particularly fast in the air, so she's often a confirmed kill for his Deadeye.
Oh, too late for that.
Fortunately they can push on without Farah, and she spawns at the next point. The enemy team gets the res and starts trying to contest it outside of their spawn again. I'm really not seeing a lot of logic to this, but our Farah player has been making relatively sound decisions so far.
I'm slept in midair. Wow.
We're still seeing some unusual control of Farah's air capabilities though, leaving them dropping to the ground more often than is necessary. And deja vu? Another ult that just wasn't well timed. Think about the situation. Are the enemy team going to be able to choke you right to your spawn doors? It's doubtful. Even if you trade 1 for 1, your team will respawn that much quicker. And then you've got the advantage again, so it's not worth wasting ults for it. So, interestingly the logic here is to switch to counter the enemy team's Genji. The thing is that Farah pick wasn't really being countered and could have been a far greater effect on the game. They've now lost a significant portion of their damage as we discussed earlier, and I'm not sure how confident this player is with Winston. Not very, judging by the way they're running in a straight line towards him holding left click. As you can see, Winston doesn't really fit the team comp well enough to provide a real threat to the enemy team, and their Genji isn't putting himself out there in a way that puts him at risk. Fortunately, the Mercy res gives them another chance to try and build momentum and push further. At this point my decision making would be to dive their supports. Anna's already used her dart, so there's not much stopping you apart from Zarya, and with your shield back in 3 seconds you'll have some form of defense. This kind of push is what would help your team retake control and push up while their team is distracted by the Winston player. The ults come together in a very untimely fashion as before, with no combo, but it was still enough to shut the enemy team down.
No mercy.
I suppose Reaper has now been picked to deal with Winston. Interestingly enough, switching back to Farah here would be a good choice, as Reaper can't do anything in this situation. Ulting and switching here is a logical approach, and will save time being wasted.
Oh, it did? Huh. No! I jumped right into it!
Okay, now switch. Yes, I'm so pleased, this guy has some game sense, he's thinking logically. Mercy killing is a difficult task, because she spends so much of her time suspended in the air. Logically this role would go to Genji, but he's nowhere to be seen right now. It's still good thinking to avoid that res, and then the potential fight turnaround. Zarya just ran straight past the enemy Reinhardt to secure the ult. Seems a bit strange considering there's no one else to actually defend the backline. Again, it looked like it was in aid of shutting down the Mercy, but... Oh, I can't be dealing with these ult combos. It's not this player's fault, of course. There's just no communication from the other players, and it wastes so many opportunities for team kills. It's a smart idea here to actually do a bit of flanking action. Flying up on the left and going over the building behind them will allow will allow Farah to get a view of the backline, and would make it possible for her to drop on top of one of them, confirming an entry kill. It comes with its risks though, but if your shift is nearly off of cooldown, you've got a pretty reasonable escape method there. This ult here is actually pretty reasonable, considering the enemy team are too preoccupied to deal with it, and it clears both tanks, allowing them to push onward.
I'm down.
There wouldn't actually be a problem with the Farah playing from a building here to ensure that she's got a good trajectory on her rockets. It's just such a waste to be shooting them horizontally. Good consistently in prediction with the Mercy pick though, which could be key here to finalising the push. Still a lot more horizontal play though, which really isn't that necessary. It puts you at so much risk and stops you from hitting the shots you could hit from the air.
Got a Zarya on the payload. Okay, I moved her away.
I mean, how often do you see a Reinhardt actually charge a Farah? No Mercy res either. That's something I've definitely seen before. So they've done pretty well as Farah, and we've seen some good stuff so far. Let's do our mid-game analysis, shall we? So, first and foremost, we've seen some very good communication. They've communicated what they can at the start of the game, which can save some lives, and they've also communicated throughout. They've communicated when they boot people into foreground and made important calls. They've also done an excellent job of adapting. Well, personally the switch to Winston to counter Genji didn't really feel that necessary, but interestingly enough it caused their Genji to switch to Reaper, which didn't actually do them any favours, especially as they switched from Winston straight after. Target priority is also quite reasonable. Focusing on Mercy is important, and although it can waste a lot of potential damage, there's no point in winning a fight and leaving the enemy Mercy alive, and this player clearly knows that. What about things we can see that could be improved though? I definitely think individual hero mechanics are something worth focusing on. I'm not sure what this player means, but it seems like staying in the air as Farah seems to be a bit of an issue. The aim wasn't bad at all, but setting yourself up in situations that makes it harder to land shots is unnecessary. That being said, the early concussive blasts were on point and used correctly. Another thing would be trying to coordinate ults. It isn't really their responsibility to make sure their teammates attempt a combo, but as one of the only people speaking they could potentially create a more organised environment to capitalise on their ultimates. The final thing I've noticed so far is positioning. There's been some pretty vanilla positioning. If you remember what I said in my Roadhog video, the ability to flank at the right times can really separate the average players from the truly good, and in this case the same applies. Farah has the potential to get a 1-up on many players if she can position herself correctly, otherwise it's hard to get that entry. My midway through prediction is going to be plat. I feel like this player is likely to be high plat in a low plat game, maybe making that push to diamond. They've definitely got some things right and their attitude is what you'd hope to see from someone successfully climbing the ranks. It's just that their hero mastery so far leaves a little bit to be desired, which is common if you're in a position where you often feel. So on to the second half. They actually changed role completely and ended up taking Reinhardt. They were going to play Roadhog, but after seeing the final team comp, they opted for Rein, which is a much safer choice. It'll be interesting to see here at what point they decide to drop down and which way they choose to do it. This will be a pretty good indicator as to what level of play this is, because the enemy team went about it all wrong. Interesting. I was hoping this team would make a better play and retreat to the actual choke point, but jumping on them here seems to have worked out, especially with the Widow picks. Hopefully now they back off and actually hold the choke, or go back to high ground, because sitting on their spawn is pretty much useless.
You know who else is broken, BBs? Orisa, she needs to be buffed up the ass.
Run behind. Nice.
Like, her health is so low.
Okay, it's starting to look a bit like a mirror of the exact same thing that happened last round. Luckily for them, no Farah was present. I'm sitting here holding out hope that they might retake the high ground for the positional advantage, but it doesn't seem like it's making any difference anyway. Ah, of course, a soldier ultimate right outside their spawn. Seems good. I'm really starting to reassess my thoughts towards this rank.
Battle Mercy! Oh, you know, no idea how happy it makes me to kill Winston as a Mercy.
What a surprise, the enemy team actually grouped up and pushed, using their ults to give them some momentum. I actually expected our Rein here to have ulted first, but there wasn't really that much of an opportunity. Oh my. Well, that was interesting. I guess they don't play Rein that much. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the current position of the payload and the position of the enemy team. This is why we don't hold the enemy team so close to their spawn. All it takes is one wipe and you've lost the chance to defend the choke, and the chances of being wiped outside of their spawn are so much higher than they are defending the actual choke point. On a side note, after losing that point, taking the left exit from the spawn point will give you a much safer position and stop the enemy team from squashing you before you can get set up again. Fortunately for them, the enemy team decided not to press the early offense.
Fucking Winston.
Fucking Anna. Winston wouldn't be a problem if she wasn't talking to me.
A risky attempt to try and get some damage in that room, but it paid off and allowed Xayah to build some charge at least. It looks like he just dropped his shield at the last minute, which is unfortunate. Xayah was enough of a threat to the enemy team there that Reinhardt could have kept his shield up, allowing her space to move back when she takes the damage. The res gives them another chance to retake the payload though, but it was not to be, and they couldn't reach the Mercy fast enough. It almost felt like Reinhardt was just taking up space here instead of being able to deal any significant damage. Maybe a nano boost would have helped.
Who's behind it?
The final choke, but one of the easiest to defend, especially with high ground. Things become pretty intense now, as they have Winston and they can gear more towards completely ignoring the line and just trying to take care of the
The
backline.
amount of damage he actually like get hits with, I can like get a res.
Especially with Ryan falling victim to a charge like that.
Oh shit, he's going for me.
Okay. Oh, he just went to the fire structure.
Dude, Reinhardt just destroyed 2 of us.
He's still behind us.
Straight up no mercy.
It's so intense and Ryan is so close to death. I can't say I have any suggestions as to what he should have done differently here. There's just not a lot of presence from their team.
Oh, someone else got him. Oh, boy.
Finally though, a charge that makes connection. Followed up by a good ult which clarifies that this push is over. It's actually pretty fortunate here that the enemy Mercy wastes her res, as the enemy team already have 0 momentum. This kind of makes me wonder again, why are we using a soldier ult when there's no fight even going on?
That Winston's like no health.
It's actually very interesting here that this player is clearly concerned about the enemy Farah and the potential flanking behind the building, but never considered doing that
There's a
themselves.
Farah, does she have a role?
It's been a while. I think
A risky charge which actually secured Reaper's position to ult, as no one would be able to shield against it. After the initial hiccup, this defense is actually looking pretty solid. This isn't the first time they've allowed themselves to be charged. As the gap closes, it becomes harder and harder to have the time to dodge, so you need to make a decision to either be the retreater or the pusher. Much easier when it's communicated with the team, of course. The enemy team are approaching less and less coordinated, which looks great for our Reinhardt, and he's ready to use his ult when the situation arises. Let's hope it's not wasted.
Oh, that's good next.
And there it is. It's ideal to Earth Shatter right after Mercy ults. Well, not right after, once they've obviously come off of their invulnerability. But actually getting that ult on them then can stop them from using their momentum to get back into the fight.
Riders! He's flying! Coming
There's a good little fire strike there to finish off Anna as well and builds him a little bit of ult charge, although it's unlikely to be ready for the next fight. This is it, guys. Oh god! Oh, what was that? That's a very risky play considering the enemy team do have mobile heroes capable of contesting the point. Some very odd decision making there that could have been potentially a losing point for the game. Fortunately there was enough players on hand to clean up the point for a close victory, but that was still questionable. So it's time to take a final guess then. This was a very strange game. The first half was much better both in terms of decision making and display of individual skill, but this is sometimes the issue with filling. Not everyone will be at their strongest hero all the time, and the team did need a Reinhardt, so the fact that this player made that sacrifice is worth noting. Their communication stayed solid throughout, which is very important and never worth downplaying. We didn't see much more evidence of adapting picks, but I believe Reinhardt was important there, so that's fine. They showed us that they can do that in the first half. In terms of improving, I think we've seen further evidence to support what we've discussed previously. It's worth practicing the heroes you're likely to fill on, so that you're confident you can play them throughout the ranks. Baiting ults using your Rhine shield and landing your charges and fire strikes can have such a big impact, and although we've seen some evidence of that, there's still some pretty questionable charges in there. I would say positioning is something that definitely needs to be worked on across the board, but again as Ryan it can be quite hard to consider, as really you should be aware of where the team is, and holding chokes is definitely a pretty standard action, and it's very stationary. That said, I would like my advice about defending the first choke listened to across all of the maps, because it's so vital and that piece of information can help everyone defend a lot better. I think something that could definitely be improved here is game sense, and that's very difficult because it's almost on a primal level. Let's take the final charge on the enemy Reinhardt for instance. In his head, I imagine his thought was to keep their main tank away from the point, so that they can't push on and contest. The problem is, he's left his whole team exposed to do this, and not only that, he doesn't win the fight because he's charged in behind enemy lines. To combat this kind of thinking, you need to look at it from a very wide perspective. Not just the initial result of your action, but how will this impact what follows? Will it actually stop them from reaching the payload? What heroes do they have that are quick enough to get there? What will my team do without me defending the payload? If you can consider all of these things before you make decisions, you'll be much better off. But unfortunately split-second decisions like these take practice in order to approach logically, instead of using base instinct. So what's my guess? I'm going to stick with Platt. Dead in the middle of Platt. I think this player has potential to go further, but it wasn't too hard to draw up a list of improvements. There were so many odd mistakes in plays happening from both teams in that game, it's definitely not going to be any higher than Platt. So, drum roll please. Boom, Platt. I'm quite glad I'm right here. He's actually lower than I expected, but he has even touched Diamond this season. Taking the improvements I mentioned into account, will definitely get him back into Diamond, and I imagine things will stay that way until mechanical skills improve beyond that. Thanks for watching guys, it's interesting to see a game from someone who's willing to fill, because in my opinion, a player who is able to fill at a high level is a well-rounded player, and that's the best kind of player you can hope to encounter. If you want to participate in Guess the Rank, send me your VOD to the email in the description. If you can edit the ranks out before, that's perfect, if not I can get my friend to do it. Remember to let me know what rank you thought it was going to be in the comments guys. Thanks for watching.